I mean, who among us wouldn't go back for their Walkman? Hey everybody, welcome to Mainly Movies. Today I'm going to be talking about the 10th film in the MCU, Marvel's 2014 superhero sci-fi comedy, Guardians of the Galaxy. If you're new here, please consider subscribing for a variety of movie-related content like reviews, rank lists, and trailer reactions. All my reviews include a breakdown of the pros and cons, my rating, and some tailored film recommendations, so be sure to watch through to the end of this video for all of that extra content. Guardians of the Galaxy stars Chris Pratt, Zoe Saldana, and Dave Bautista, and was directed by James Gunn. It tells the origin story of the Guardians of the Galaxy, and focuses on their quest to prevent a powerful artifact from falling into the wrong hands. There's something to be said about a shakeup, about the occasional refresh. Too much of the same thing can start to feel a bit stale after a while, so injecting something different and new into the mix can make a big difference. 6 years and 10 films into the MCU, Guardians of the Galaxy served as that refresh, injecting not only a new tone into the franchise, but a whole new set of characters. The previous 9 films all focused on the widely known core Avengers, the 4 characters that even non-comic readers knew. Solo films, sequels, and team-ups had given us different views of the same thing. But Guardians of the Galaxy was something very different, and the first MCU film to focus on what I would consider lesser-known characters. It's funny now, considering we've had a dozen such movies since, but this seemed like a wild gamble and deep-cut dive at the time. But it was exactly the kind of change the MCU needed. By introducing these new characters and the worlds they lived in, the MCU gave itself the opportunity to greatly expand. We were able to step beyond the Earth-centric focus of the first phase and a half to see what cosmic MCU had to offer. At the time, the sudden expansion was honestly a little overwhelming to a non-comic reader like myself. All these planets and species of aliens and the world building, or should I say galaxy building, it was a lot to take in, and while very interesting, I found myself pushing most of it to the background in favor of trying to follow the plot. But I have to say, this film has made for a very interesting rewatch in the post-Infinity Saga era, because much of what was once overwhelming and extraneous information now makes perfect sense, having seen just how much of it's relevant to the later films. This is a giant space adventure, but the plot itself is fairly familiar and easy to grab onto. A MacGuffin, the ragtag team that forms out of necessity and personal gain before turning into something much more. That idea of something much more is very emblematic of the film. This is a movie that's extremely easy to prejudge. A superhero space movie? A comedy featuring a talking, gun-toting raccoon and a walking tree with a very limited vocabulary? It's a movie that sounds ridiculous on paper, something that would almost assuredly be a dumb throwaway comic book movie. But this movie is something much more than that. This film definitely is a comedy, and mostly earns its laughs and humor usage, and that's certainly one of the things it and its sequels are remembered for. But there's also so much heart to this story too, even more than I remembered, having not rewatched this film in its entirety in nearly 6 years. This has got some genuinely tragic, heavy components, but the way it's all folded into the character development and humor makes it palatable. So the story of sacrifice, teamwork, and found family hits harder than expected. And suddenly, the idea of adults crying in the theater when a talking tree says, "We are Groot," doesn't seem so far-fetched anymore. Speaking of the we of We Are Groot, it's the characters that really bring this story to life and make it what it is. Before this film came out, I had never heard of any of these characters. I knew absolutely nothing about all of them, so I had to get all of my knowledge and understanding from the film itself. Whereas most MCU origin stories devote their entire runtime to a single character's background, Guardians of the Galaxy does it for 5 characters, and manages to tell a complete story as well. You get information about each character in a steady trickle, but by the end of the film, you know and care about each of them. Their development feels genuine, and their interactions are always fun to watch. There's a lot of humor there, often stemming from Drax's literal take on everything, but there's also a lot of heart too. All of these characters have individually suffered great loss, so the found family element and their loyalty and affection for one another, by the end, is wonderful to watch. They feel like a real team, rather than just a team up. Beyond the 5 Guardians, there are a lot of other characters. perhaps a few too many, which contributes to that slightly overwhelming sense on first watch. They're a bit hard to keep track of, but it's another aspect of this film that's much more manageable after watching the rest of the Infinity Saga, where many of them get fleshed out a bit more. Even on first watch, though, Nebula was a standout here, and her intensity, as well as her sibling rivalry with Gamora, was extremely interesting to watch. Although she and a few other characters like Yondu are antagonistic in the story, the film's main villain is Ronan, and he's a bit underwhelming. Not bad. He looks cool, and the performance is fine. He just feels almost inconsequential, despite the massive threat he poses. The threat itself is memorable, once you're able to fully grasp the extent of it, but the character of Ronan is not. So much so that I had forgotten exactly who the big baddie was here in the 6 years since I last rewatched the movie. Despite having a forgettable villain, Guardians of the Galaxy is not a forgettable film, and it still remains one of the most fun, well-rounded entries in the MCU. It was a rejuvenation that gave the second half of Phase 2 a necessary jolt, shocking it out of the repetition of sequels it had fallen into, and introducing a unique style that felt like it came from an individual rather than a committee. If you've been following my reviews for any amount of time, you know how much I love music, especially classic rock. So you know I can't close out a review of Guardians of the Galaxy without briefly touching on the soundtrack. Awesome Mix Volume 1 is, appropriately, awesome. Blue Swede, Raspberries, The Runaways, all music that I grew up listening to, and all music that still instantly improves my mood. A lot of movies use popular music these days, but the incorporation of 70s pop rock hits just works here, which is something that can be said of the film as a whole. It just works. Alright, let's talk about the pros and cons. Pro number 1 has got to be the characters. Even though the story here is fun, it's the characters that really make this film. Specifically, the 5 members of the Guardians of the Galaxy. They each have such distinctive personalities that are entertaining on their own, but the combination is what really makes things special. Each pairing or grouping combination offers up new and interesting character dynamics. Most of these lead to a good deal of humor and entertainment, but there's also some heart there too. I remember this was one of the things I was most skeptical of going into the movie the first time, but it's the thing that keeps the film so enjoyable on rewatch. The second pro is the tone. There's always been a little variation among films in the MCU, and the franchise has always been characterized by its humor and colorful brightness, but Guardians of the Galaxy took all of those elements further than they had ever been before. The comedy was pushed to the forefront here, and it's one of the things the film's best remembered for, but there's a lot more tonal variation here than the movie gets credit for. It's funny and often lighthearted, but it's a story punctuated by darkness, violence, and occasionally even tragedy. The laughs come throughout, but it's a surprisingly emotional watch, and the heartfelt aspects of the found family plotline elevate this far beyond the typical superhero comedy. The third pro is definitely the soundtrack. Awesome Mix Volume 1 is a more than fitting name for the 60s and 70s sonic throwback. I grew up on 60s and 70s music, and they're some of my favorite decades in music still, so the soundtrack here was great for me. It wasn't something I expected at all when I first watched the movie, so when the likes of Redbone, Blue Swede, Raspberries, and The Runaways were not only used but actually incorporated into the plot, it blew me away. I know a lot of people scoff at needle drops, but when they make sense in the context of the plot or character development, I'm all for them. On the con side, the biggest issue is Ronan. Having an underwhelming villain is a well-documented curse in the MCU, so this maybe isn't that shocking, but it's still disappointing. The threat of Ronan is pretty significant in the film, but the character almost feels throwaway, and like he could be swapped out for just about any other power-hungry, non-human villain in the MCU. Maybe it's because the threat and intrigue of Thanos looms over the story, or maybe it's because the lesser antagonists of the film, like Nebula and Yondu, have much more interesting characterization, but Ronan just ends up feeling pretty forgettable. Before I give you my rating and recommendations, I want to remind you that if you're interested in buying Guardians of the Galaxy or any of the other films I mentioned today, I do have affiliate links for all of them in the description below. I get a small commission from anything you buy using one of my links, so I'd really appreciate it if you'd use them if you're in the market for any of these movies. I'm gonna give Guardians of the Galaxy 4 out of 5 paws, though this is a high 4, and I occasionally toy with the idea of bumping it up to 4.5. It's got a dynamic set of characters, a compelling space adventure, fun visual effects, and a lot of humor and heart. Plus, perhaps best of all, it has a great soundtrack full of 70s pop rock favorites. I would recommend Guardians of the Galaxy to people who want a fun and different superhero film. The idea of a space adventure might sound overdone, and the description of the characters undoubtedly sound ridiculous, but it's a movie that somehow really works. It's funny and entertaining with a decent story, but it also has a lot more heart and thematic heft than you'd probably expect. It's also a surprisingly pivotal movie for the rest of the Infinity Saga, so it's one you definitely don't want to miss if you're working your way through that story arc. And if space adventures aren't really your thing, but you're a fan of classic rock, then at least this will have a soundtrack you'll love. If you liked Guardians of the Galaxy, I would recommend The Suicide Squad. Even though this is part of the DCEU, it's a colorful and bombastic story that's driven by its characters. There's a lot more violence and crassness, but director James Gunn uses a similar style here, and once again, he draws heavily upon the Dirty Dozen. If you like the story of friendship, loyalty, sacrifice, and heroes coming in unexpected forms, you should definitely check out The Iron Giant. It also gets bonus points for being another movie where Vin Diesel voices a lovable character with a limited vocabulary. And if you just want some more of the Guardians team with all their humor and heart, you'll want to watch Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. It introduces a few more characters and takes the plot in a very different direction, but it still retains the tonal balance of the first film. Alright, a couple questions for you guys. Number 1, have you seen Guardians of the Galaxy? If so, what'd you think of it? And number 2, what's your favorite movie about a team? Be sure to leave your answers in the comments below so we can get a discussion going. Alright, so if you got some enjoyment, insider information out of this review, I'd appreciate it if you'd hit that like button. And if you haven't done so already, please hit subscribe if you're at it to see more videos like this. Till next time, this has been Alyssa with Mainly Movies. The way life should be.